and to our Boardwalk Talks program. My name is Mendel Graber. I am one of the educators here at the Sea Lab, and this morning we are going to have kind of a retrospective of the 50 years of the Dauphin Island Sea Lab, and even before that, before the lab was located on Dauphin Island. So with us this morning are Dr. George Crozier, Dr. Judy Stout, and Dr. John Dindo. So Dr. Crozier was longtime director of the lab, and he's been here since before it was located here on Dauphin Island. Dr. Stout was one of the, as she says, founding mothers of the lab, again, from before it was here on Dauphin Island. Dr. Dindo has been here for a long time in different capacities, longtime chair of the Discovery Hall programs. He's also run our operations, and he's done institutional advancement. He is now semi-retired. But there's a lot of institutional knowledge of the Sea Lab's history here, and we'd like to talk about that and capture some of it, a little bit of it. So with that, I am going to let you guys tell us a little bit.
Okay. Thanks, Mendel. The lab has evolved through many places, many people, many things. How do you advance the slide? Okay.
Judy's
The University of Alabama, for a number of years, taught a summer course in the original building on Heron Bay. And this is a place that students did actually come from all over the state. Dr. Bob Shipp met his wife Linda during that class period. And so this was, then they lived up Bishop's Manor, Judy? Is that the?
There were dormitories.
Dormitories up there, yeah. But this is where the classes were held, and it made a very good impression in general. And the University of Alabama was sponsoring this. Next slide. The process began with one that we missed the pictures of, because Dr. Fred Whidden was the head of the extension campus for the University of Alabama, and he wanted a marine program, and he wanted a campus for the University of Alabama in Mobile, and the dean in residence at Tuscaloosa refused to do that. So they actually floated a bond issue through the state and built a lab that was supposedly run by joint directors. One was George Allen, who was head of the seafood division for the state, and the other was Dr. George Rouncefell.
What year was that?
Or
roughly?
I don't know, when was South founded?
60s.
I mean, this in the 60s.
Yeah, late 60s.
Dr. Whidden said, if you're not going to let me have a campus at the University of Alabama, I'll build my own school. But meanwhile, this had become very popular, and they were having classes down there. But the two directors, George Rouncefell and George Allen, were probably two of the worst administrators that I think had ever been found. Doc had been a Bureau of Commercial Fisheries director all over the world. But they didn't get along, and so eventually they divorced. And I'll never forget the spreadsheet that I was so fond of, because they had two boats, they had two trucks. One got the truck, one got a boat, and in there, and I always teased May Tillman about it, there was apparently only one winch, and that had to be sent one place or the other. Well, it was spelled W-E-N-C-H, and it said it was hand operated. And May never got quite over that, but she was in charge of it. At any rate, they finally,
back up too.
Yeah, okay. They began looking. This was one of the buildings that they got. This was in Viola Battery itself, and you can see where the University of Alabama Marine Science Program was there. And the first boat, which was originally named the Aquarius, so that dates it. This was the age of Aquarius. But this was a retired submarine net tender from World War II, to give you some idea of the age of this vessel. Wow. And this property was part of that division. But ultimately, George Rouncefell, with help from Dr. Joe Volker, who was somebody I had forgotten about, he was president of UAB, very good. They were looking for property on the ground that was larger and more useful to them. And so they settled on property on Point of Pines, which is out in the boonies from Viola Battery, so that's out in the boonies. And Dr. Rounsfeld floated in a U.S. Army Corps of Engineers quarters boat, and that was a boat that came from the river, and the Corps used it to house the people working on the river for the Corps. And George Rounsfeld, a guy named Tom Woods, and a couple of graduate students literally dynamited a ship channel in themselves. And they floated the quarters boat in, and Doc shoved it over a platform and let the water out again. And Doc always said his proudest engineering feat was to have the boat there, and it was flat and level. And Judy was actually there before I was, because she was working for Doc on his second book, I guess. Yeah. And we had another smaller building, but this was the only thing we found after January '72. The quarters boat burned during Christmas break. We really never knew why, but it completely destroyed that structure. But we were already in the process of acquiring, and that's George Rounsfeld, May Tillman with me, and that was on her retirement. And George Oakes was a doubly retired military sergeant motor pool, and he basically stayed with us from Point of Pines and moved to Dauphin Island. And the early graduate students were very fondly remember George Oakes, because he built all of their gear for them. It was usually, he was very irascible, but he didn't ask them why, and he built whatever they wanted, and he built it out of junk.
And nicknames.
But not only that, he had names for everybody.
Everybody, yeah. They weren't always flattering, but
Correct.
you always knew who he was talking about just from the name itself. So in that period of time, prior to moving to the island, we acquired the property, the Air Force Base, with the formation of the consortium, the Marine Environmental Sciences Consortium. And had a terrible time. I used to joke about it, because if you gave a talk upstate, it was messy. It was messy in its name, and it was messy as far as they were concerned. They knew what Marines were. That was soldiers, and the environment back then, they were afraid of talking about the environment. That was that was truly messy. Science was okay, but consortium was an illicit affair between a man and another married woman. So, the consortium predated the lab itself, because this was what was left of a marine science program moved onto the property. And Dr. Barry Vitor, we'll see him later. It was a former Air Force base, but it was really a radar station that filled in for the Strategic Air Command. And you can see the radar dome, and the beauty of the place was that it had dormitories, it had houses for family residences, it had buildings that were built to withstand ground zero atomic attack. So you couldn't be criticized for building down there, because you couldn't ever blow it away. But this is how we started with this, and it was very exciting, because we moved down there. Barry Vitor and Dr. Rounsfeld and I were the only scientists, and we were naming buildings after ourselves. That's going to be Crozier Hall, that's going to be Vitor Hall. And it was very exciting, but we were due to open with a summer program in 1972. So George Oakes built picnic tables, and we hung fluorescent lights in the old computer building, and the computer building was most of that large building there. The only problem was, first of all, there were only males in the Air Force, one bathroom for the whole facility. There also was no 110 voltage. It was all fancy high voltage stuff, so we had to rewire the building with extension cords and a variety of things to hold summer school in 1972.
And we didn't get a ladies' restroom until 1975 or 76.
Oh, maybe longer than that. But at any rate. So at this point, this is the third laboratory in the marine science program with the University of Alabama was in residence there. Also, we had a director that had been involved with Sea Grant. He was the director of Mississippi Alabama Sea Grant, but he wanted to be a laboratory director. Another problem that emerged and wound up, do you remember the year? It must have been 70, something like that. He evicted the University of Alabama Marine Science Program from the Dauphin Island Sea Lab. unfortunately, he didn't realize that that meant that all the scientists and all the staff were leaving.
Were gone.
He was going to be there with Bill,
Moore.
Bill
Moore,
Moore,
yeah.
his administrative assistant would be the only ones left, because he'd thrown everybody else off. But this is the kind of thing that we were dealing with. But go on to the next. These different buildings around the place, and we began doing some research early on. And there used to be little islands along the old bridge, and so we had data stations there, which were also not bad for fishing. But they were taking hydrolab readings on a regular basis there. But none of this stuff was. You had to do it all by hand. It wasn't easy.
Not only that, this bridge is a drawbridge. And so if you're traveling at nighttime from Mobile to Dauphin Island, and the barge operator, the lift operator was up there and he saw a barge all the way down to Pettyboy, he'd shut the bridge down. So you'd be stuck on the bridge for hours and hours waiting for that pusher tug to come by.
The other thing about the bridge was that you have to realize how much lower this bridge was. The oystermen could pull up to the bridge and climb off their oyster boat onto the bridge to go get food or whatever they were looking for. And there was quite a history of boats back in the days. The Rouncefell, we named it for Dr. Rouncefell when he retired. And we had, Will Schroeder was with us then doing the descriptive oceanography, and he had a good relationship with NASA. So they gave us a boat at one point. We got the Pisces, was a Vietnam era river boat. And there was, on the top, they were mounted, it was a wood boat.
Wooden boat.
And they mounted a machine gun on the top of it. So they took the gun off before we got it, but the mounting and everything was still there. But
The problem with that boat was, because it was plywood, it leaked. And so Dr. Schroeder, as you can see in the photograph up there, Dr. Schroeder felt that every graduate student, whether they already had a course or not in oceanography, had to take his oceanography course. And part of that course involved taking that drogue out there, releasing it in Mobile Bay, and following it on an incoming and outgoing tide, using that boat called the Pisces. Well, the Pisces leaked like a sieve. So you really didn't want to get the Pisces too far from a shallow water, because eventually you're going to have to run it all the way up, beach it, pump it out, and then go find your drogue.
But this was, the lower boat down there was one of the first donations we had. I think it came from one of the industrial plants there at Theodore. But we treasured every one of them. I don't have a picture. The students that remember it, somebody had given us a boat that was about 16 feet long and about 3.5 feet wide. We called it the RV Splinter. And Gary Gaston, who eventually is now the chairman of biology at Ole Miss, and Bob Bryan, who is the director of research at Baylor Medical School, turned it over offshore one trip, and that was the end of the Splinter.
Well, one of the things Judy was commenting about was how, you were in the early days, you were kind of making do with, these second, third hand boats and facilities, and, that you were kind of lucky to have.
Yeah, I think there are several points that have led to the length and growing success of MESC and Dauphin Island Sea Lab. First off, some of these things look like impediments. They look like things you had to overcome. We occupied a 16-year-old radar base. However, they left all the dorm furniture, they left the cafeteria, they left the forklifts.
Trucks.
We didn't have to buy anything. Trucks, well, we did have to buy stuff. And it was small, as George said. There were only 2 faculty members, George Oakes and May, to begin with. But because it was small, it began as a family affair, and it remained that way. And the resilience, and I think the stick-to-itiveness and the making it happen, is because it was a family affair, and still is, although it's much larger now. But some of these pictures and also it's been, over the time, it's been a launching ground for successful people. He just mentioned head of marine biology at Ole Miss.
Ole Miss, yeah.
Chairmanship at Texas.
Yeah.
This is on the Rouncefell. This is Steve Heath, who looks like a hermit now, who was director of the Conservation Marine Resources Division. So, I mean, it's been the springboard for a lot of people.
Well,
And I
the-
just think that's important to make note of.
Yeah, and the family started, one of the things that John and I began talking about was that the women that made this place work, May Tillman was an amazing woman. I mean, Judy knew her as well as I did. She was the registrar, she was the secretary, I guess she typed for Dr. Rounsefeld.
bookkeeper.
Oh, now the cook, now that's different. See, they had a galley on the quarters boat, and we had students there. But May would not come out to do breakfast at 7 o'clock in the morning, so I did the breakfast. I also was the sous chef at lunch and dinner, and and it was always good. And when we came here and had a really fancy galley that was inherited from the Air Force, May eventually, although she was still the registrar and doing the budgets and all the rest of it, she ran the best cafeteria. I always said that I didn't know what was the future of the Dauphin Island Sea Lab would be, but it was always going to be known as having the best school cafeteria in the state of
That's right.
Alabama, and that's true. It truly was.
I mentioned people, and we don't have pictures of everybody, but it was people who were hired out of Dauphin Island, Bila Battery, Code-In, who would not have had jobs like this otherwise. And they matured, they evolved into positions of responsibility here with high school diplomas, like May and Rita and some of the others.
Well, most started in the cafeteria slinging hash, as did some of our children, come to think of it.
Right, and for instance, some of you may know Rodney Collier, who was hired here by his father-in-law as a baby, as a crewman on the boat.
Right.
And he
16.
grew up to be the
Right.
boat captain. Not only did we have graduate students, this is Ross
Ross Lysinger, yeah.
Reisinger, what, he sails boats now or something?
Yeah,
No,
yeah, he sails
And,
down in the Caribbean.
Lawrence Johnson came from Heron Bay.
Heron Bay.
And became a boat operator, maintenance man. Everybody did everything. His wife was very critical to the cafeteria, but then groups of graduate students came in, and when Dr. Hopkins came in here, he brought a whole cadre of graduate students and technicians with him.
And a pot of
brought
money.
A pot of money, et cetera, and expanded the whole operation here just by relocating from West Florida.
Yeah.
But with him, he brought graduate students who were married. This is Linda Lutz.
Yeah.
This was before computer graphic art. She is hand drawing graphics, scientific illustrations,
Yeah.
et cetera.
Yeah.
So here's a wife who goes on the staff and the faculty here. So it was amazing the number of people who came in. And George mentioned children. This is Randy Sluty,
Yeah.
who some of you may have known. She was hired by Schroeder to data entry. She was the first technician, really, the first computer technician here. And she stayed here until she retired.
She also did the weather every
Did
morning.
the weather every day.
Every day.
And this is her son, Neil, when he was a little guy. The children were always here. I can remember changing Billy Schroeder's diapers here at the Sea Lab. And our children often worked. Your children, Mendel, have volunteered at the Sea Lab. Both of my kids, one mowed the grass, and one was the sous chef for the salad bar in the cafeteria. Matt Shipp, who is now a renowned chef and restaurateur, grew up under May's tutelage in the cafeteria. So it's truly been a family affair.
Then there didn't seem to be a ceiling, because Georgia started out in the cafeteria, but Georgia Mallon took over as the financial manager. And one of the favorite stories about Georgia was, because we made do with what we had, and the lab was such a weird thing because nobody knew what Messy was. So we went 5 years without being audited by the state. And when they came in, Georgia, most of y'all wouldn't even know what I'm talking about, but the ledgers were huge things with books. They were this thick. Well, Georgia had the 4 previous years were wrapped with rubber bands because she wouldn't buy new binders for the financial records. And the people doing the audit said, what, this is really hard, we got in the binders. She says, yeah, but those binders are expensive. We only needed one set at a time. So there was an awful lot of that. And Lynn Bryant, another one of the people from Bila Battery. I mean, there was so many of these people that came and learned to do things that you would not expect them to do, and they did them cheerfully, and they went, even after the hurricane, everybody pitched in to do everything together. But one of the things that we're very sensitive to is, and Susan Ivester came in, and there were people that were willing to do everything, because Susan would take, and I would take classes from Discovery Hall out on the field trips back then. So Tommy Walker, Johnny Booker, Fred Reese, who's done almost everything for anybody everywhere. And there's Doug Clark in the cafeteria back then. That's Valentine. That must have been some kind of party.
It was your
Back
party.
in the-
Yeah. Oh, my party. Okay. Well, I
And
don't
this is somebody you probably all know.
yeah.
I'll let you guess.
No
He's
guesses.
still around across the street.
Yeah, yeah.
But Dr. Heck had a project where they had to have fish includers or excluders, I can't remember what. They had to build these big cages, and it was a major project. Everybody pitched in. Here's Georgia the bookkeeper. There's Jenny
Jenny
Cook.
Yeah, from Discovery.
I think that's Lauren Cohen, a postdoc. Everybody's pitching in. And y'all have, thank goodness, summer school is out, I still understand. We started it in the early days because of trying to keep people together after the burden and the strain and the adrenaline loss during summer school with so
Yeah.
few people. And so we'd have a thank goodness summer school is out party for everyone.
TGSSIO.
Yeah,
Right.
right there.
That's a sign from this year.
Yeah, and I'm glad to hear that's still going
Yeah.
on. And this was one, I think, and these are boat people
Yeah.
and plumbers.
Maintenance. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Dr. Ship,
Doc-
Dr. Hopkins,
Hopkins,
Dr. Deans.
yeah.
Everybody was
Robert
doing
Dean.
everything and supporting each other. Even graduate students. Look, the outside of the building had to be painted. So what did they do? The graduate students pitch in and paint the outside of the building because we didn't have enough maintenance workers. Then,
The hurricane.
The hurricane. 1979.
Yep.
and I know y'all are
Hurricane Frederick.
suffering from Sally right now, and I've walked through the buildings here. This was a benchmark. This could have destroyed MESC and Dauphin Island Sea Lab. Well, it practically destroyed
did.
the sea lab.
Yeah.
It did about $750,000 to $1 million worth of damage and was followed in 1985 by Elena, which did the same amount of damage. You could see the track of Frederick as it came right in on top of us. And some of the older buildings here. This is the weather station. This is now the boat yard. And I don't even know what y'all call all this back here now. This is the kind of things it could do.
Yeah.
So one of the things that Dr. Schroeder had was, where that weather station is, he actually had an elevated anemometer, which was the shape of an airplane with a propeller on it. And down here on the island, that thing left its stand at 143 miles an hour. Now, the recorded speed of Hurricane Frederick was like 135 up there at Bates Field in Mobile. But down here, 143, 145 is when that thing hit here.
And that was the end of it, because we don't know how high it got after
Right,
that.
because the anemometer is gone.
Just to show you some of the destruction, island-wide, this is ship and shore.
Yeah.
And about 20-something people took shelter in here in the coolers,
In the
et cetera,
coolers.
including Dr.
Yep.
Schroeder.
Yeah, Dr. Schroeder.
And this is what happened to it. This was one of our previous buildings. I think this is the rec hall. So, and this, we had our own two-lane bowling alley
That's
until
right.
Frederick.
Right.
As I say, this could have ended it all. But again, it's the good news, bad news. We got state insurance coverage from this. We got FEMA coverage from it. And with that money, we made major improvements here. Not only restored the place, but we made major improvements that we would not have had the budget to do. So it's kind of we got new buildings, we got.
One of the things the storm did, the buildings survived because of how they're constructed by the military. The roofs were tar roofs with small gravel pebbles. When that storm hit at 140, it took all the gravel and flung it all over the campus. There was not a window on the campus that was not broken. The storm was dry originally, and then following the storm, it rained. And so every building was soaked inside all the way through it.
And again, about people. I've got another picture similar to this. This is boat crew, housekeeping, maintenance, sitting on the bench over here, which you can't see, are faculty and graduate students. This is like 2 days after Frederick, or 3 days. People found a way to get home to
So the bridge
Dolphin
was
Island.
destroyed, let's just say
Oh, we
that.
should say that.
Right,
The
yeah.
bridge was destroyed. Big factor. That could have ended it all, certainly.
But they had to find their way back here without a bridge.
Right. And everybody came back and said, okay, what do we need to do? And everybody did it. Here's some graduate students who stayed on campus. I think they stayed in some undamaged rooms in Albatross, and they're cooking out. They're cooking their supper together.
When you say they stayed on campus, you mean like they came back and they stayed even though it
A
was,
few of them did, some of them still
but
had
not
houses.
necessarily through the hurricane?
No, not through,
No,
Schroeder's the only one who
Schroeder's the only
stayed.
one
Right.
dumb enough to do
Right.
that, yeah. He's dead now.
But George just made a comment.
Hey, go back and show Charlene.
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Like I say, family affair. Here's Charlene Dindo.
Yeah.
Down here to pitch in, clean up things.
helping picking up.
Yeah,
So the graduate students in that top picture are cooking out.
yeah. Because there
Well,
was
we
no
had
power.
no water, had no
Right.
power.
No
water.
water, no electricity, no
Right.
bridge,
So
No windows.
showers were taken in a swimming pool. That's
with the snakes.
with the snake.
This is the library. Now, nobody relates to a library anymore because you just Google it. And so, I mean, it was lined with books and the ceiling came off. And the first thing everybody did to pitch in was gather up all the library books, move them to Marine Science Hall,
And
and
stack 'em.
put them in the 3 classrooms. So if you needed a reference, you had to go through 3 classrooms and dig through piles to find that reference. However, good news, bad news, we got the roof back on the library, and we managed to convince, Fred and I did the surveys for FEMA and state insurance. And we convinced them what horrible condition all this military furniture was in. It could not be salvaged, could not be used over again. And they replaced enough of it that we were able to purchase brand new dorm furniture for, I guess, Challenger, I guess it was. But it got here on a barge before we had refurbished
The building.
dorms. So the library then became the storage room. And George says something about the auditors coming in after 5 years. It was after Frederick, so it's longer than 5. When they came in, good news, bad news, they'd say, okay, we want to go through your inventory list, where, we want to see this, and we want to see the inventory tag on that. And we want to, make sure you're keeping up with all this state property, and it would be like, oh gosh, I think Frederick got that.
It's in the dumpster.
I think it's in
Frederick
the
got an
dust.
awful lot. Now,
Whether it did or didn't.
We're forgetting one thing, the library was a 3/4 distance basketball court.
Right.
And
Had a parquet floor.
And
Yep.
theater.
And a
theater.
movie theater.
Yeah,
movie
all of
theater.
that was from the Air Force.
Right,
The-
right.
Yeah, oh, yeah,
the
yeah.
Bowling alley,
The movie theater,
Movie
the
theater,
basketball
basketball.
court.
Yeah.
Well, because when the Air Force was here, there was 100 enlisted men, then an officers, and it was a remote station. They didn't go back and forth. It was remote, self-contained. So the Air Force had their own power, their own sewer system. Everything was self-contained.
Here's what the bridge looked like afterwards. The wave action lifted the tops off of many sections of the bridge. Before the storm got here, they lifted the span and left it up because they intended we would all be able to drive back
Drive
down
back.
here. And they didn't want the span to be hurt. Well, you couldn't drive, this is Cedar Point up here and Dolphin Island down here. You can see you'd have to ford some areas of Mississippi Sound. And then they began to build it back twice as high. For 2.5, almost 3 years, we went to work on a Sea Lab boat. And here's just before they finished the top hump. This is the Intercoastal Waterway.
So I'll never forget the day that they cut the ribbon and we all walked across the bridge.
Stayed in the truck.
The engineer for this bridge was from France. And everybody was a little skeptical about this bridge. And he said, in his broken English, he said, "We've built you a bridge that will last forever." Somebody said, "When's the last time France had a hurricane?"
Well, how did people get to Dolphin Island then? This was the first. There was a,
Wait, how long did it take to build the bridge? So
Two and a
how
half
long
or
was
3 years?
it
Yeah.
without a bridge?
Almost 3 years.
Yeah.
And then what about electricity?
8 to 9 months.
yeah, we had
But they brought in a generator.
George secured us a generator.
Yeah, they were gathering stuff at Brookley Air Force Base downtown, and I happened to be there, and they had a generator. They said, well, this is supposed to go to Dauphin Island to some lab. Now, it was supposed to go to the conservation lab, but I was there first. I said, okay, we'll take that to the Dauphin Island Sea Lab, but we'll be ready for it.
But while we were on generator power, you couldn't run the sensitive instruments, you couldn't run the computers, et cetera. So we moved some of that to an office in Mobile temporarily.
I have a couple of comments. Paul Bologna says, so great to see you all. And then Elizabeth Heath says, it's still true, May's Cafe is still the best.
Yeah. All right.
That's good.
So they first brought in a landing craft, they chartered what is now the Duke, the charter boat?
No, sir,
Or
no,
maybe the
it's the Lady
previous
Anne.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah, to bring us back and forth from Viola Battery. I don't remember where the landing craft left. It took an hour and a half or so to get here on the subsequent ferry, which is the original of what we've got here. But that was not convenient to get back and forth to work every day. So we had Sea Lab boats, such as, this is a winter trip to the island to go to work or go home. You were bumped off the ferry if you didn't meet the requirement for essential traffic. So you can see essential traffic. Here's what was first in line, was the Miller beer truck, which was in front of the fuel tank truck. So you knew what the priority.
Very essential.
Very essential. I'm sorry, Angela. This was summertime,
There's the helicopter.
and here's the helicopter that brought in some of the
Big skyscraper.
generators.
Yeah.
This is building the Heron Bay Bridge.
So
We-
the
we stayed-
boat top left is,
Doug Gilbert.
he's waiting for,
At Heron Bay, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're waiting for other people.
Waiting.
The lab actually ran a schedule. I mean, if you showed up at a certain time in the morning, that's when the boat was gonna leave, and you spent the day on it. You didn't go back and forth. You spent the day down here, got on the boat, and came back in the afternoon.
I rode the ferry once.
I
That
rode-
was enough.
I brought my family down here every summer to stay for summer school on the ferry. Dogs, cats, puppies, kittens, everything, and drove them back in the evenings. My husband came down on his own boat every Friday night to spend the weekend with us, brought bicycles and all kinds of things. Just for a historical image of what it did, and the good news, bad news. This is Discovery Hall afterwards being torn down. This was one of the Officers Club or enlisted
NCO
men?
Club.
NCO, Non-Commissioned Officers
Yep.
Club. And it was Discovery Hall, and it was flattened. And of course, our buildings are named after research vessels. This is the architect's drawing of what Discovery Hall was going to look like. And here is it under construction. You can see the basketball court.
so let's go back just a second and talk about the inception of Discovery Hall,
Okay,
the Discovery Hall program.
yeah, I think
George?
we've got something in here, but go ahead.
Well,
Oh, okay.
early
Well,
on,
we can come back to it.
even when we were at the quarters boat, I had a picture of it. We borrowed or rented, I guess, a small shrimp boat, wooden shrimp boat, and I took classes from Davidson, biology classes from Davidson High School out, and we had done that. We continued to do it. I said that was when we were in Viola Battery and the quarters boat. So that became an early commitment that was made by everyone, because all of the faculty ultimately participated in what we now call Discovery Hall. And it wasn't, sorry that I don't remember the years that Booker and well, you worked Discovery Hall with Booker and Tommy Walker and Fred Reese did it for a couple of years before
That, right.
And they're the ones that sequence of generations in Discovery built the reputation of the lab. But I don't think there was ever a time that if a faculty member was asked to take a class out, that they wouldn't do it. You know, it was just part of the process was so important to us to provide education. And I've told this story a few times. When the kids that came from all around the state, so many of them, particularly from minority schools, had never seen a microscope. Never seen a microscope.
Water.
Or been,
Water.
certainly never been near
Right.
the Gulf of Mexico. So that was an early commitment that just everybody seemed to buy into. And
so that predated the Dauphin Island Sea Lab here, the
Right.
location, and then this building
Right.
was where it was housed when.
Yeah, the
After-
whole one that got,
yeah.
yeah,
After
it
we built it.
evolved till it became such a significant program, it had to be staffed. It was
Right.
not just incidental, whoever was available that day. to-
Right, it went from
On the boat
a summer
or-
program to
Year-round.
an academic year program year-round, and it went from local to statewide, and then it went to regional.
But again, bad news, good news, look at the new building.
yeah,
Look at the furniture. I
Right.
mean, we built what we needed and built it the way we
now,
needed it.
John and I talked about this. We designed these benches for Discovery Hall, and for reasons that are lost in memory at this point, they had, they separated each side of the bench with a wall.
A shelf.
No, there was a piece of plywood
Right.
there. So if you stood, we realized on the first day we stood in there to try to lecture to a class in there, you could only see the people that were sitting on the benches right in front of you. You couldn't see anybody the rest of the room. We cut
But
them all out.
they were designed for aquariums up on top. We didn't think about lecturing in front of the
Yeah,
benches.
Yeah.
So the NCO was destroyed and became Discovery Hall, brand new building, just the way we needed it built. The Commissioned Officers Club was
Was,
destroyed.
yep.
This is, you can see, this, old Coast Guard houses which have been washed away. And this is the building of Galathea. So this was, again, recovering money to build a lecture room, assembly room, et cetera. And this area in between, as you can see, has no building between it, because there was none there
Look
until.
at how much land there is there
Yeah.
between the
That
building that
became
became
Horizon.
Galathea and the Gulf.
Oh, yeah, look at this. And subsequently, Will Schroeder's Eagle Scout's son planted trees there. We had a pine grove there.
Speaking of Will Schroeder, Paul Bologna says, waiting to hear about the golden nozzle.
We don't have a photograph of that.
I don't think we have enough time for all those stories.
You could see the cannon on top of the fort there in the back of the picture with the smile.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We had put a lot of stuff back up by then. Daryl was the head of maintenance then, and he was very proud of his smiley face on the fuel tanks.
And I think that's it's a portrayal of attitude.
That's a good point.
It was
yeah.
real commitment to
Emoji.
everybody
It's an
and
early
so
emoji.
much,
Yeah.
so much joy
Yeah.
over
Yeah.
recovering. And then we moved on.
And
Yeah.
Jamil says, great to see you all. And just for those watching, feel free to ask questions or share comments.
So currently, Dr. Valentine's let out a contract, and they're going to redo a whole wet lab, build a modern design wet lab, and it's under construction now. But back then, our wet lab consisted of
And it's in the same building.
Yeah.
handmade things like fiberglass tanks, wooden tanks that we fiberglassed inside.
Caskets. Or not
They
caskets.
were out.
Yeah.
They're coming.
They're coming up in a minute, yeah.
That building had been housed huge generators
Three
to
giant
keep
generators.
the radar facility running in case of lost power. And over here, about where the boardwalk comes into the estuarium, there was a huge diesel fuel tank that fueled that generator. So they ripped out the generator and all that to put in the wet lab. And this was during the dedication of it.
Yeah, that's Dr. Whidden on the
For
on the
those
right.
who are not familiar, the purple in the corner is one of our
Azalea.
Azalea
local
Maze.
institutions, the Azalea Trail Maze.
Yeah.
It was a big event.
This was a little more about.
Yeah, this is
Discovery Hall.
Discovery Hall, how it got started.
See, the director out taking a field trip. Susan Reese, I think, is taking this one.
Yes.
Touch Labs, and then ultimately ExxonMobil funded the Bay Mobile.
And Alabama Power.
Was it Alabama
Yep,
also?
yep, and that allowed us to take our program throughout the state to places that schools in which kids would probably never have an opportunity to come down to the coast. So we took the coast to them, and that program is still going on today, and a very viable program.
You and I took the inaugural trip in that truck.
In that truck. That's right.
Really?
Uh-huh.
And you see the interweaving of graduate students, university classes, Discovery Hall, field trips, et cetera, and it was all intermeshed together. It was very messy. And ultimately, both grew so much that they were severed organizationally into two programs, Discovery Hall programs and university programs, which
Yeah.
exist today. But we haven't talked at all about funding, which were as big an obstacle as hurricanes. We were kind of the stepchildren in the state education budget. There was a category, if you went down through all the universities, and Talladega School for the Deaf and the Blind, and way down here was MESC, under other. And we were just kind of ignored or cut because nobody knew what it was.
Nobody knew it.
But what I think saved our funding is the growing strength of the Discovery Hall program, because it had gone statewide. And if a teacher knew about Discovery Hall, it wasn't because of graduate programs. It was because of Discovery Hall. And she made her legislator aware. We
And when-
cannot do away with this.
And when
Well,
George and I
comment.
went to Montgomery to seek funding for the lab, when you go into one of the legislator's office, he had no clue what we were doing down here, but if you said Discovery Hall, they knew a child, they knew a teacher, they knew somebody that had been down to the lab, and that held through for years.
One of my favorite stories, at some point during that period of cuts, a commentator for the Montgomery Advertiser wrote a column and actually raised the question, what is this Marine Environmental Sciences Consortium? And they're getting all this money, you know. And what happened is, after he published that, teachers from all over the state wrote him about what Discovery Hall did, and he apologized in the next editorial that he wrote. Yeah, the teachers that have participated and directly or indirectly have become a tremendous advocate for the lab. And I think it goes back to this I don't know, just gut feeling commitment to education. And you know, we've not got, I don't know how much we'll
So
do with
this,
the
so this
estuarian.
building here has gone through lots and lots of
Yes.
usage. From the United States Air Force with an 80-foot radar dish in there to guard the airspace between here and Cuba, to renovation to storage. It became a big storage facility. Then we got some money and it was gutted. We reskinned it, put some new skin on the side. Then when we had this concept of building an aquarium, we had to have a place to show people to begin with, the window to the Gulf. And so inside that building is where we started out with some aquariums. And we had Congressman Callahan from Mobile came down, and George and I were showing him around and showing him what the future of the estuarium would look like. And he goes inside that building and looks at that column and how it was built, and he goes, only the federal government could afford to build a building like this.
So can you go back and show the piers of the building?
Nope,
Where
wrong
was-
button.
Keep going.
So
Right there.
Solid
Yeah.
those are solid concrete, reinforced rebar, and they go over 20 feet into the ground. The cost to tear the building down was more money than the lab was receiving from the state.
And they took up a lot of footprint of the first education center.
Yeah.
Those-
Well, the other thing that has to be said, if the models that you can see up here, Auburn did the most wonderful models for us and designs that ultimately became what I used to sell the idea of the aquarium, of the estuarium. And
there's a-
they'd ask me, people would ask me what, it's such a detailed thing, because John and I designed that where they're not bullets, they're displays that you have to read, because we wanted children to read, not just try to find factoids like you see in so many of the aquariums. So, and people would ask me about the estuarium, and my reaction was it was a very expensive teaching tool, and I firmly believe that, and I think it still does that. There's a lot more touchscreen stuff now, but you've still got the long stories about the Mobile Delta and what its value was, and they have to read a sentence that is grammatically correct and a whole complete sentence, got a subject and a predicate and an object. And I think that was something that I have no idea if it really made that much difference to these kids, but it made a difference to me because the way Discovery designed the questions, it was a scavenger hunt to find the factoids in these long stories. So you had to read the story to find the facts.
I just want to drop in a little point. We showed the evolution of the Radome, and for a year or two, it served as
Right.
what would become the estuarium. And so you see, there were students in here, there were tanks in here, in between those columns. It served as the launching pad kind of for the estuarium.
Well, Tina says, so fun to hear the stories about vessels, buildings, and people. Stanton here, enjoying this. Great to see you guys. Jason Stutes was always about the family. Came in during the funding doldrums, working with nothing to create extraordinary science and outreach.
Cool.
People.
Yeah.
So, our host here, Miss Mendel Graber, was one of my high school students. Judy, you want to show her in that upper right photograph?
Is that her or that?
That's Mendel working with me on the back of
that's
the
you.
Roundsafel.
The barrel.
The
The
barrel,
barrel.
that's. And there's Jenny Cook, one of our great educators, passed away a few years ago.
These field trips were, this is a kindergarten class from a Montessori school. And it went everything from kindergarten classes up to high school science classes. So it was a broad audience.
Well, I'll comment on that too, because that's a pretty common story. So I came here first as a 16-year-old high school student, took the high school course. We're long lining for sharks in that picture. And I kind of fell in love with the place and basically never left. I mean, I went back and finished high school and then went to college, came back as an undergraduate summer school student, and then, a year out of college, joined the DHP faculty. John hired me, and I've been here ever since.
And then she convinced me to hire her future husband.
Yeah. When we met here as summer school students, I went to the University of Alabama. He went to Auburn, to consortium schools.
Didn't you say you've been here 20 years now?
It'll be
Total?
20 years in 22.
And I think Robert Dixon, who was in on the ground floor with the estuarium, I think we had a picture of him in here somewhere. He said
we've
he's been
got
here
him, yeah.
25 years. It's
Right,
just
Robert-
hard to believe.
Right, George and I hired Robert because he was a graphic artist, and we hired him out of Moat, and he came over here to help us design buildings, exhibits, and everything else.
Just
But that's a pretty common story where people are just, they start here as young people and they stay.
John
And then they
Bennett.
get old.
Yeah.
yeah, well, these two are discovery days in the early
Right.
days, which have continued to expand. Here's Robert.
Yeah.
This was
Dwayne Biggs, Cheryl, Robert.
Is
That's
that
the guy
John?
that put in the glass
For the
on the aquariums. And
This is a model of the estuarium. There's the building of the baby marsh. This is the marsh before we got the estuarium in, and then
right.
just more people.
Yeah.
People.
Georgia Mallon. Yeah.
Georgia.
Man.
Dr. Heck,
People
Dr.
moving
Douglas,
on, yeah.
Dr. Valentine.
John Pennock is the head of the National Sea Grant Program.
Not,
now.
yep.
Dr. Cowan. I think the previous slide had Dr. Pinnock teaching, didn't it?
That was
Yes, it
Discovery
was.
Day.
Yeah, that was Discovery Day.
We used any kind of vehicle we had to get people to the marsh, back from the marsh. Today you could never do something like this.
I think
Judy
that
said
was
she
a
thought this
coastal,
was-
I think
yeah,
it was
coastal
coastal
cleanup.
cleanup, and with a bunch of students.
And Angie Dixon.
Angie
there?
Dixon.
Yeah, this
When
is
she was a
Angie.
student.
This is Wayne Canis, who taught geology.
So Angie came as a summer school student, and then she came back to teach in Discovery Hall program. She
She
was
worked-
one of my teachers
she
when I
worked,
came as
yep.
a high school student.
And then we got funding from the state through Harper, right?
Yes.
To build Horizon Hall, that big gap between Discovery Hall and Galathea. And build just what we needed for 4 classrooms and how to equip them properly. This was another new building. That's that orange building out front that's like another wet lab or
wet lab.
something. We're probably about through.
Oh, and there, the coffin vaults. Those were the first mesocosms and
Right.
experimental aquariums. Coffin vaults are cheap
Right.
compared to some other things. And of course,
Tina
the-
asks, do you recall what year the first Discovery Day was held? So it was right after the
I couldn't find it.
Education Center was open, right?
It was funded by ExxonMobil.
Yeah.
I mean, back then it was just Exxon,
Yeah. I don't know when it was.
but I'm not sure what the,
Very good, 95, okay.
I thought it was earlier than that, if you say so.
I'm pretty sure it was 92 or 95.
Yeah.
How did you get the dorms painted? That was,
well, what we did on that, this AmeriCorps.
I'm sorry, okay.
Over the years, I've been able to get 3 different AmeriCorps groups, and actually, Dr. Valentine had another AmeriCorps group scheduled for this year, this fall, but they ended up being diverted, I think, up to New York for some work up there, emergency work up there. So they deferred, and they're gonna bring back the AmeriCorps next year. They will come back here. Wonderful young people.
Do you want to point out the house, the arrangement of the houses in that picture, and then in the bottom left? So the houses were moved, bottom left, and you
I
can
got it
see,
already.
yeah, the Shelby building has been constructed in that picture.
Well, the story behind that was that in the wisdom of Solomon, the Coast Guard refused to give us all they wouldn't leave them where they were because they didn't want all those hippie professors living amongst the good Coast Guard people.
So point out where they were in the,
Right there.
okay, that's where they
Back
used to
there.
be.
Well,
There were like
half of
25
them-
houses originally.
Yeah,
right.
Half of them moved here.
Yeah. Dr. Whidden moved them, and he was very upset.
And that was like in 71?
Oh, no, it would have been later than that.
74, I
think.
74,
75.
75,
Okay.
yeah.
But half of them remained over on the Coast Guard property.
Still are there, I assume.
No, they
They're-
removed them all.
Well,
Oh,
they
okay.
got damaged so much by
Well,
storms,
they
and the
got
beach
set on
ate
fire
it
by
away
kids.
too.
Oh, yeah.
And this area here was a big septic field.
Mm-hmm.
Well, no, it's not. Yes, it is.
Yeah, it was.
And we restored a marsh here that had previously existed, and this was all septic fields. And in digging it out to create the marsh that's back here by the boardwalk, found the old peat from the original marsh. But in order to, as I recall, John, you'd have to remind me of this, in order to be able to do that on the property, we had to have title to the property. And
That's-
after 30 years,
That's
we were
correct.
able to get title to the
Because
property.
it was a government facility, the government doesn't just give it to you and walk away. They don't want you to have the property and develop it into condos or something. So for 30 years, we had to file a report with them, telling them that we were using the facility in the manner in which we signed up for it in the first place, research and education.
Oh, wow.
And then the other story that goes with that, the septic field was, as we were building the marsh, somebody came down and they had this old map, and on the map was an X, and the X said body. And so that put the stop on building the marsh, because all of a sudden, supposedly there was a buried sailor out there. No one took into the consideration that the Air Force had already rearranged all of that for a septic field. But it stopped us. It cost us $25,000 to hire archaeology professor from South to dig 2 trenches to make sure there was no bodies out there.
Oh, wow. I don't remember that story.
Well, the story was, there was a headstone out there at one time about where, I guess the debris display is on the sidewalk over towards Billy Goat Hole. There was a headstone there, but apparently it had been in the fort, it had been here.
moved
it had
all
been there,
over.
and they just kept moving it
Right.
around and locating it. So that was where the story came from. And, the evolution of boats and the ways people did research were just, and then, of course, we built the
Well,
Wilson.
yeah, the very first boat that we ever really built, had built for our research purposes, was the E.O. Wilson. It was built in Slidell.
I have a comment from Kevin Kirsch. What a trip down memory lane. And from B.E. Warren. Thank you all for coming together and taking us back to where this amazing place started, and also the hardships faced and overcome throughout the years. It's been very special.
These are pictures from Hydrolab, and this was almost the first really in-house project. The Russell Foundation, Ben Russell was an avid diver, and I had brought an interest in the scientific diving to the lab from Scripps, and he was able to connect us with the Hydrolab project in the Bahamas. And that's a picture of Dr. Vitor on the right and Tom Hopkins on the left in the habitat. And we did that for 5 years, I think.
So I got here And I got here in the summer, and I was a graduate student under George, and they were getting ready to make their last trip down to the
Yeah,
Bahamas.
yeah.
And we had a stake bed truck, so George had me helping out all the other students, loading that truck, dive gear, this, and this. And so my thought was, this is awesome, I'm gonna get to go down into the habitat. Lo and behold, I was told, many are called, but few can serve.
Well, and I don't know, that, the last time I was in, and I don't remember which of the Smithsonian museums there are, the Hydro Lab was recognizing an exhibit in the Smithsonian
Yeah.
with the names of our scientists on the wall.
Alabama Aquanauts.
The actual thing was moved to the Smithsonian?
I'm not sure whether it was there or not, and I don't even know what's there now.
I don't either.
All of these are various shots that we began,
Jim Cowan.
graduate student
Yeah.
research seminars. We began to enlarge the faculty by bringing in postdocs through grant funding, which added to the brain power, the curriculum offerings, the ability to work with graduate students. A lot of underwater habitat and fish attraction devices, wetlands, seagrass beds.
It's kind of a dark picture, but that's Mike Dardo there.
Yeah.
Yep.
There were a lot of opportunities to teach outside as COVID have already introduced here again. I mean, what goes around comes around. At this point, we had no air conditioning and no power in Marine Science Hall. And so this is under a tree outside the cafeteria lecturing. And of course, Marine Technical.
Is that you, Judy?
No,
Yeah.
I think it's Glenn Boston.
I think it is,
Glenn Boston.
Linda.
And that's George?
This
Yeah.
is George teaching Marine Tech methods,
Tech
where the
methods.
gear was too large to do it inside.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Various classes, I mean, just as you do now, you don't just teach in the classroom. And one of the things that many students remember most is the real experience they got, the real practical, applied, out in the wilderness, you know, out.
It's not learning out of a textbook.
No,
Well, I mean, you do some of that too, but.
Well, you have to have some background.
Yeah.
And you get there wherever you can, or you used to, you couldn't do this now.
Right,
And this we inherited from the Air Force.
it was.
And
Deuce and a
this-
half Army truck.
This deuce and a half truck was confiscated by emergency services after the hurricane because it could go anywhere, whether it's flooded or not.
Jenny Zimlick says, thanks for another generation of our family being able to attend Discovery Hall programs. We love our DISL family. Delaney says hi, Dr. Stout.
Hi, Delaney. And hi, Michael and Jenny. Yeah, you go to the vet's office and he starts talking about Dolphin Island, and you're like, how on earth do you know all that about Dolphin Island? He says, well, I took your course. I didn't remember that. All over, field marine science for graduate students was to expose graduate students from an environment other than a diurnal tide in the muddy Mobile Bay and Gulf of Mexico. And so one year they would go to the Florida Keys to explore a tropical environment, next to Maine to explore the rocky shorelines of the East Coast. I told Mendel that this trip to Seahorse Keys was one of the first trips, and every graduate student had to design a project, a real, honest-to-God research project.
In 10 days?
In 10 days, and do it. But you didn't correct them a whole lot in their design, and they had been here at the Gulf of Mexico, and they were used to diurnal tides. And so they designed their sampling routine. They're going to get up at this time of night, and they're going to get up at this time in the morning, and then they're like, there's
my
too
God.
high tides. There's too low tides. What is this?
So just to kind of reiterate this point, the graduate students they're not restricted to Mobile Bay, and neither is the research.
Right.
So you already hit on the program in the Bahamas, but,
all over.
It's not restricted to,
Antarctic.
these are just some of the points that we're making.
Oh, yeah, goodness, yeah.
And then Johnny Booker, who started Discovery Hall programs
Worked-
with
he
you,
worked,
went
yep.
down to the Keys.
Newfound
And
Harbor.
taught at Newfound Harbor Sea
Uh-huh.
Camp.
And so you would connect
So we
with Johnny
connect with
Booker
him.
when you took students down there to the Keys.
This is, just had to throw this in here,
Yeah.
all about people.
Yeah.
Every day at lunch, for years and years and years, we played volleyball at lunch, didn't eat lunch. And the daily game was the graduate students versus the faculty. An aside comment is the faculty usually won. And then 4th of July, it became a three-way tournament between summer school students who thought they were young whippersnappers. They could do anything, could beat any of us, and the graduate students and the faculty. The faculty also usually came out. Well, they came out with the Dauphin Island Derelicts for the name of the graduate students.
The summer school students.
Was it the summer school?
Yes.
Okay. And, you know, with great resentment for that, this sign appeared. This was the faculty. I think we're up. That's it.
Yeah. Well, that's-
So are there any kind of parting thoughts or anything that you'd like to bring up that we haven't already?
Oh, plenty. We
Yeah.
talked about 4 hours.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's just a blessing, all that's happened here, the good and the bad, and certainly the people.
Yeah, I think Judy was right in the beginning. It's people that made this place happen.
continue.
We didn't have money from the state. We had a pittance money, 40-some buildings down here with $100,000 to run the whole laboratory right in the beginning. But it was people that came down here, fell in love with the place, worked on their research, worked to help the lab grow and everything, and to this day, it's the same way. I mean, people that are here, they come here not just because they want to get their degree, but because it's a great place to come and they contribute to the overall growth, I think, of the whole laboratory.
And I would say an encouragement. We are emphasizing Frederick, which was a big events in our personal and career lives. And it damaged everything except Marine Science Hall. Now you're seeing the effect of Sally on Marine Science Hall.
Which was last September.
And Albatross, et cetera. But this too will pass.
Right?
And
So-
good stuff will come out of it.
And just since this photograph is up, and that was one of our research vessels, that vessel was built in 1968. And they decommissioned it, Woods Hole got rid of it, we got it, we ran it for 25 years. And the really good thing is Dr. Valentine has gotten money and they're building a brand new dedicated research vessel for the Dauphin Island Sea Lab. A large vessel, 68 foot long, which is gonna be just tremendous add capabilities for the lab.
One of the things that I wanted to add briefly was that we've also attracted some other different kind of organizations. And of course, my principal activity in the later years was in coastal zone management. But we housed the Mississippi Alabama Sea Grant
Right.
Program from the very beginning, as soon as the National Estuary Program
Founded
was
the National
available.
Estuary
Right,
Program.
we had
Yep.
right here at the lab, still houses, I think, a lot of the
We're
administration of
fiscal
these
manager
things.
for them.
And so there was a distinct effort along those lines to do policy and try to support the activities of the state and the region in its in policy decisions and needs and advice to the governmental entities, I guess, at every level. And I'm very proud of those things.
And I'll add too that we've kind of focused a lot on the early history because you all, remember the early history. And it, it's good to capture that. There's been a little bit of history since then. But, there's, maybe we need to do part 2 of this.
There you go.
I can't do it.
That's right.
You left in 98, is
98.
that? Yeah. But thank you so much for coming out and chatting
Thanks
with
for
us.
Well, thank
That's
you
fine.
for hosting this, Mendel.
Indeed.
It was a joy chatting with you about it.
It was pretty hard going through all this stuff in Angela's office, though.